For this podcast, we will be briefly discussing civil rights from 1955 to 1968. The first notable event would be the bus boycott. It began on December 1st, 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus for a white man. She was arrested, and that sparked a mass boycott of the bus system in the South by blacks. The boycott was attempting to desegregate the bus system. The bus companies finally relented on November of 1956 due to the loss of profit.
About 4 years later, on October 19th, Martin Luther King Jr. joined students at a sit-in attempting to desegregate an all-white department store. King was arrested and sentenced to 4 months of hard labor. He was released on bail thanks to the intervention of Robert Kennedy on May 4th, 1961. The Freedom Riders departed from Washington, D.C. on a ride to the Deep South. The purpose of this ride was to test the new policies placed on buses. 10 days later, the Ku Klux Klan attacked the Freedom Riders, and one bus was firebombed. That same year, a book titled Black Like Me was published. It gave a first-hand account of how racist and segregated the South was. It was subject to much controversy for years.
On September 10, 1962, the Supreme Court made a monumental decision regarding education. The courts ordered the University of Mississippi to admit James Meredith, a black, as a student. The university admitted him, and Meredith became the first black student of the University of Mississippi. When he was attending, he was assigned U.S. Marshals to protect him. In 1963, with the assistance of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. protested segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. Dr. King is jailed during this protest.
While in jail, he writes a letter from a Birmingham jail. The letter was written to clergymen defending nonviolent protests against racism. The same year, James Meredith graduated from the University of Mississippi. 10 days after that, 250 people marched the March on Washington. This was also when MLK Jr. gave his famous I Have a Dream speech, which is still being read/listened to even today. A turning point on the civil rights movement was when President Kennedy was assassinated. The turning point happened when the nation was mourning, when Johnson used this push through civil rights legislation in Kennedy's memory. In 1964, beginning in June and ending in August, an event occurred that was known as the Freedom Summer. It was a drive for mass voter registration organized by the SNCC. During the Freedom Summer, 3 workers went missing. Their bodies were found on August 4th, and it was obvious they were shot and beaten. Also during the Freedom Summer, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 on July 2nd. This act banned discrimination in employment and public places. 1965 was a tumultuous year for the civil rights movement. One such example was the March on Selma, Alabama. This was organized by MLK Jr., but policemen quickly put a stop to it. The unresisting protesters were beaten and thrown in jail. It was dubbed Bloody Sunday, and because of it, more voting rights acts were passed. These acts prevented the South from controlling voters. Another example of violent happenings in 1965 were the Los Angeles race riots. They were incredibly destructive, leaving 34 dead.
Civil rights had a huge breakthrough in 1967 when Thurgood Marshall was appointed as a justice of the Supreme Court. He was the first black justice on the Supreme Court. Edward W. Brooke became the first black senator since Reconstruction in the same year. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot by James Earl Ray. Riots and protests broke out, leaving the nation in shock and terror. Although MLK Jr.'s death didn't end the civil rights movement, it did slow it down.